This is Unsiloed, brought to you by Alumni FM, connecting people through stories.
Welcome to Unsiloed. I'm here today with Bernie Roth, who is a professor of engineering and also, I guess, one of the founding fathers, can we say that, of Stanford's famous D.school. Also the author of this book called The Achievement Habit. Stop wishing, start doing, and take command of your life. Welcome, Bernie.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Now, look, when I was rereading this book, I realized how much of this book, which came out, I guess, about 8 years ago or 7 years ago, has sort of just become, I don't know, almost background knowledge. You know, you're always advising that we question all of the assumptions and ways of looking at the world. And I think these ways of looking at the world have become so integrated into the way a lot of people think that these terms design thinking are no longer unfamiliar to so many of us. And when you started teaching, of course, you were teaching courses in mechanical engineering, and you have taught and done a lot of work in robotics. But the bulk of your teaching is really, and the bulk of your writing has really been about what we might think of as personal effectiveness, right? And I guess it seems odd that this is something that could be taught in an academic institution. So I was wondering if you could tell me sort of, when you first introduced these courses, like the designer in society and, the transformative design class and, introduced, I guess, these workshops on creativity. I mean, how much of a departure was this from, the normal kind of academic teaching?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I must say, the original thing was I had a very straight engineering background out of New York City. I had a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD in mechanical engineering, and didn't care anything about these other things that you're alluding to. And I came to Stanford, and I met some unusual people, and somehow I got invited to a weekend down in Esalen for Stanford faculty. And in being there, I realized that a lot of the things they were talking about, which had to do with the human potential movement, really related to what I was doing. It just, we were applying it to different things. I was applying it to machines. They were applying it to people. But it seemed to me we were solving problems in a similar way. So I came back and I started to introduce that into my teaching. And then the stuff hit the fan. My chairman called me in and he said, "Roth, you're a smart guy. Don't you understand? Engineering has nothing to do with people. It just has to do with things. Cut this crap out." And he was being nice to me. He was advising a young professor. He ultimately became my dean. We had this kind of cordial relationship, but never really a great friendship. And when he retired, when he became 80, they invited me to his birthday party. And I wondered why they invited me. And it turns out it was a roast. And I was supposed to repeat this incident. And I did that. And he said, "Oh, you remembered that, you bastard." So what had happened in that time is the whole thing had changed, where this man he stormed the beaches in Normandy, he was a straight guy. He was trying to help me. Engineers don't deal with people. By the time he was 80, and now it's the most popular, one of the most popular aspects of engineering is applying these things to your life and to situations which we didn't. So the world really changed a lot. Actually, when I was writing my book, which, as you say, was like 7 years ago or so, I was a little worried about that I was going to get hit from my friends in the design community, that I was really dealing too much with myself and personal things. The mantra then was, you design for others, not yourself. But yet, if you look at the back of my book, I have this incredible things on the jacket from the head of the premier design firm in America, IDEO, saying, "Before you fix the world, you should fix yourself. Read this book." So it's changed. The world has changed a lot. And these things are now partly accepted in engineering. And in the D.school, which is in the engineering school, incidentally, it's an institute in the engineering school, we get about a third of our students out of engineering. So it's not your grandmother's engineering anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I like to tell my students in the MBA program
Yeah,
that the thing that they're going to learn is how to become more effective individuals, right? So, they think they're coming to learn finance and
yeah,
accounting and marketing, but really what they're learning is how to become,
yeah,
more effective. And obviously, subject knowledge
yeah.
is important and so forth, but none of it is really useful, without having the capacity to be effective. So, I mean, should every school be teaching this, or does it make sense to have some place like the D.school where you can learn your finance and then go to the D.school to learn how to become effective?
Well, it's really spread. I don't know exactly what's going on at Berkeley, but at Stanford, there are a lot of places where people are doing this stuff in different departments. So the D School is one hub for it, but we get people from all over the world in all sorts of departments. I can't tell you how many heads of graduate schools of business have come to see me to know how to set up a D School. And all the school, Harvard has it, MIT has it. I mean, everyone's doing it, and they may give it a slightly different name and a slightly different twist. But the whole idea of problem solving, which is what's the basic idea, which involves a human dimension, we call it human-centered design, is kind of it's omnipresent in every profession. And so there are two parts to every problem. There's an expert part, but that turns out in general not to be the hard thing to do. I remember I was on the board of some company, and actually a Berkeley-based company, and the chairman said to me, "Bernie, can you give me someone? I'm looking for someone who can bring in a project in time and all of that." And yeah, I can always get an expert. I can always hire an expert programmer and all that. I need someone who knows how to do the big picture and to deal with these other things, and these things which are not usually associated with problem solving, but are at the heart of it. So it's common knowledge, and different fields approach it in different ways. But it's very popular now. The world has changed a lot since this fellow called me in to give me good advice in the early 1960s.
Well, I was wondering if you could go even further to
Yeah,
the origins of this whole movement. I
yeah,
mean, you talked about how when you got your PhD at Columbia,
yeah,
right? You were originally going to sort of stay on the East Coast, stay with Columbia, but then this odd opportunity
yes,
emerged for you to come to Stanford,
yeah,
and there was a design division, right, within the mechanical engineering
yeah,
department,
yes.
and that was, I guess, unusual at the time. And was that sort of design division within mechanical engineering? Is that, I mean, I remember human factors used to be a thing
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
could learn in engineering. It was sort of an afterthought, but it was.
yeah.
I mean, is that sort of where did human factors emerge out of kind of the design
No, no.
stream of thinking within mechanical engineering?
No, no. Human factors is a kind of interesting thing. It's really a misnomer. It's the most unhuman thing you could imagine. It was dimensions. It was like the mean reach of someone. How much does a woman weigh if she sits in the car? How much does a man weigh? It was all ergonomics, basically. It really didn't do with that. So that was was a technical field, and it was useful in that sense. But it really had nothing to do with what we think of now, which we're thinking now of the person's heart and their soul. And it had not, it had none, it had muscular dimensions. It didn't have those other dimensions at all. So that was an aside. And actually, at Stanford, it was actually done in a department called industrial engineering at the time, which no longer exists. No, in my case, it was because there was a fellow called John Arnold who had a degree. His first degree was in philosophy, basically. And the story is he was working as a night watchman, because what else do philosophers do? And it was for an engineering firm, and he saw what these people were doing at night when he was looking around. He thought, that's cool. Somehow he got talked to MIT into letting him do a master's in engineering. He became a professor there, and he developed ways of teaching which were different. He made up a fictitious planet where people had to design vacuum cleaners when there's no gravity and stuff. And he was interested in creativity, before it was fashionable. And his idea is not, don't teach engineers to just memorize stuff, which is the way engineering was taught, to teach them to be creative. And he got into trouble at MIT because he was on the cover of Life magazine. He wasn't publishing in the right technical journals. So he came to Stanford as a professor in engineering and in the graduate school of business. He had two professorships. And he's the guy who hired me. And if you read in my book, it was a twinkle in his eye that got me to turn down a really great job at Columbia and come to Stanford the last minute. And then he was unkind enough to die a year after he brought me out. But he set the tone for this thing of this odd thing, which was unique at the time in the world, of combining these things which we now call human-centered design with technical engineering. And he left some heirs, not only myself, but a fellow called Bob McKim, who passed away a year ago. And it gave us a wrinkle on the world which just didn't exist. And the closest would be what people called industrial design, and that involved art. So we had a program which involved both art and engineering, and then we brought psychology into it, and then we brought human factor design and computers into it. So it was this whole idea of broadening the definition of the profession. And it triggers from John Arnold's being a sort of different kind of person.
Now, when I post these podcasts, I usually list the various disciplines that the speaker or interviewee is in, and it's kind of hard with you. And I was thinking of actually adding philosophy as one of the categories, because the book in many ways has a lot of philosophy in it. And I think I love the way you ended the book, where you said that, you know, your goal is to create a bunch of Oblomorphs, right? So, you know, you really want to instill in people this bias for action.
Yes.
So I was wondering, I mean, do you really think that people overthink things? I mean, part of what you're doing is descriptive, in the sense that there are people, most of us act without thinking, right? And then later we backfill.
Yes.
Other people, they don't act because they overthink. So I think part of what you're saying is that you should act first, but not after you act, sort of construct false narratives about, you know, what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, for example, a good example is a course we have, actually someone I co-teach with, but I don't co-teach this course with him. This guy, when he was a student, invented the modern snowshoe, which was used to a tennis racket, and now it's made of metal and much better. And he runs a class called Launchpad with someone else, and their whole thing is, it's not a class, it's starting a business. And they have to have income at the end of 3 weeks. And they have to move forward, and it's okay to fail, as opposed to the more conventional business school thing, which is you plan and the worst thing you can do is fail. And our thing is, it's okay to fail, but when you fail forward, you learn from your failure and you pick yourself up and you move forward. So we really have this thing where it's, as you say, it's a bias towards action. Just do it. Now, of course, you know, we're not talking about heart surgery and stuff like that, but we're talking about stuff which is not fatal if you fail, and you can learn from it. And we find that you can do things much more quickly. We had one of the early classes, these students invented a app where you could read news with pictorially as opposed to words. And in about the third week or so, the faculty said to the students, launch your app. And they said, no, it's not ready. It's not perfect. They said, launch or get out of the class. So they launched the app. And of course, there were things that had to be fixed. But in those days, they were able to get feedback every day because it was a new thing and it was a new use of the Apple notebook. And that by the end of the 10 weeks, they were making like $40,000, and Steve Jobs got his cut out of it. And they had this very successful app that went to the top of the list. If they had done it in some other environment, they'd still be fiddling around with it rather than being out there using it. And so we find in one case after another, you have to do something. You have to take a step. You don't sit there and think and think and think about it. And in taking the step, you get valuable feedback, which you can then use to improve things. So that's our philosophy of this bias towards action thing, and the whole idea of failing forward. And it seems to work. We have influenced tens of millions of people, and it was done by students that had no expertise in the thing they were going to work on. They had just expertise in the process. And, when they needed expertise, they brought it in. It's not so hard to do. And it's a very successful method. It's not the only method, but for us, it really does work very well.
Well, I think you also said that you need to seek out problems, right? I mean, a lot of people try to avoid problems, right? But life is about problem solving. So, can you, can you design a life trajectory that, I guess you're not trying to maximize problems, but you're kind of sailing straight into the problem rather than trying to skirt it, right?
Well, it's worse than that even. I must say I come from a different world, but the world that I've turned into here at Stanford, I live with people who believe problems are opportunities. So the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. So to them, and if you think about it, that's what life is about. Life is about problem solving. I'm sure you're the same way. If I have a problem, I can't sleep at night. I'm well excited. I have a lot of energy. If I'm depressed and I have nothing to do, I stay in bed. And well, there's this book I quoted in my book, Oblomov. It's a Russian book in the late 1860s or so, which the hero, it's a fictitious book, but it makes fun of the Russian aristocracy. And this Oblomov doesn't get out of bed for like the first 200 something pages because he's rich and he doesn't need anything. So there's no point of him getting out of bed. Everyone's doing for him. And that's in a way, it's a parody, but in a way it's true. It's really exciting to do stuff. Problem solving is a great activity. And it's not necessarily frustrating. It's not like a disease, it's actually, it's an exercise. If you think of all the things that people do, that they bring problems into their life. They have hobbies that they work on. It's just a different thing. I'm actually, one of the books I use in my classes, The Wright Brothers, a biography of the Wright Brothers. It's a real example. These two high school graduates took on this thing of getting people to fly. And it's an incredible story of what they did and went through to do it. It's very scientific. They were great scientists, and they learned all that by themselves from reading. They never went to college. It's an amazing story, but it's an example of the things you can do if you devote yourself to it and you have a little bit of luck. So, the normal path of people, they go to college and they learn something reluctantly and they stumble into a profession in some way. And it's much better if you're inspired and you take the problem on as your life force. It gives you something to do. And, we usually attribute that to artists, that there's something is speaking to them. But it's the same in everything, in every profession. It's the same way. If you engage us, you have a life force. If not, it's a drag. So so problems are good. Then the punchline is problems are good unless you make a problem out of having problems.
Right. Well, I don't think you use the term, virtue, but you do talk about habits. And in fact, the title of the book is The Achievement Habit. Yep. So it seems like it's really about cultivation of certain personality traits and dispositions, which are going to lead you to be more likely to achieve, and you define achievement as the good life, right? Now, a lot of people would say, well, hold on. I mean, when you hear that, you think, well, wait a second. Are you implying that, being a busybody and, checking all sorts of things off your to-do list like that's what the good life is, right?
No. I have a friend, she said to me, Bernie, I would never buy a book with achievement in the title. And I don't mean achievement in terms of becoming king of the universe or queen of the universe or anything like that. To me, achievement is when you die, your friends don't have to lie about you. And you enjoyed life in a way that you found there was a life force. And, everyone has terrible things in their life. Life is that way. It's ups and downs and stuff. But yet you have an equilibrium in life and all of that. And that to me is the greatest achievement of all. Not, I know so many rich people, multimillionaires, billionaires. They're not happy people, a lot of these people. They're always trying to make the next million or billion, and they're having their fat cut out because they're not living properly. So, I'm not saying it's not there to have money and be okay that way, but that's not enough, really. And depending on whatever your circumstances are, you can be very content, and it can be a nice life force for you, or you can be in terrible disarray no matter what happens. So there's that part about life which is funny. We tend to say you give everything in your life its meaning, and that's kind of true. And you can give it a meaning that it's terrible. I used to have a friend, he actually has died, but he lived in Berkeley and he taught at Santa Cruz. He was a professor at Santa Cruz. And he was a single guy, and he had sports cars, and he had women and all those things, and he played golf. And he used to sleep in my house half the time on the way down and something. And he'd say to me, Bernie, you have such a wonderful life. I said, what are you talking about? We have the same life. We're both professors. You've got all these sports. I'm married, been married to the same woman for all these years. I drive a crappy car. Why is my life better than your life? And it was just his mind. He was just this kind of guy who was chronically depressed. He hated what he was doing, and nothing worked for him. And, and I'm just blessed that I have the DNA where, I don't take things to be ruinous. Whatever happens, I roll with the punches. And, there are a lot of things in my life which I wish weren't there. And that doesn't undermine my basic feeling of positiveness about being alive. And I'm glad I'm living this long, and I hope I live longer, And there are some people who have a lot more than me who kill themselves. So it's very complicated. You know that. But yeah, but by achievement, I mean really just having a good life, and really that your friends don't have to pretend you were someone you weren't, and that you should feel good about that. So, and how do I get the title? My agent and the editors, they kind of pushed me. My original title was Yellow-Eyed Cat, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the story that's in my book of someone seeing a little child seeing a cat for the first time that has yellow eyes, and realizing that all cats didn't have blue eyes, which was their thing. And in that way, the world changed. And so I had hoped that this book would be a world-changing thing for you, but my agent convinced me people wouldn't know what the title meant, and I should do that. So, but it's okay. If you take I'm sort of pushing the normal meaning of achievement, but there's nothing wrong with that, and I think it's really a good thing in the world. So, in retrospect, I'm sort of glad it happened that way, because if it gets some people to think about what we mean about achievement, and define it to themselves, I might do some more good in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned these three levels of questions, and this I really I recognize this as something that I've talked about quite a bit, and I can paraphrase it because I can put it into my words. But the first question is sort of like, what do you want?
Yeah.
Second one is kind of, what kind of life do you want? And then the third is kind of, what kind of person do you want to be?
Right.
And I think, one can talk about, I guess, achievement or becoming more effective in all three levels.
Right.
But there's the meta question of, how much attention do you devote to those three different levels?
Yeah.
And I think your point is that third level is probably the one where you ought to devote, much more of your effort and attention.
Yeah, well, because the whole public thing sells the other levels. That's the whole to become, whatever you are, you should promote to the next level, whatever that is. And it's so funny. Some guy was interviewing for a job, and he had levels. He's a teaching job, and he showed different levels of student achievements. And his top level was disruption, which seems bizarre to me. It's this thing in the world now. If you make a business that disrupts things, somehow it's the pinnacle. And I thought that was like absurd to think that that's where you want to get your students to the top level. So I mean, this is a crazy thing. You know, our heroes are people in general. If you knew them personally, you wouldn't really want them as your friends unless they could do something for you. But other than that, you wouldn't do this. I can't tell you. You know, people I know who have very famous friends. They'll say, "Hey, Bernie, when you if you're evaluating me and getting letters, don't ask this guy for a letter," because they know these guys are not exactly the way friends should be. So you know that's the thing about life. It's these gives these funny things of things you don't really want to achieve, but somehow people think that those are positive things, and they may be for you. So it just depends on what works for you. And I say my message is really to sort of try and be true to yourself and figure out what works for you. And the world is more pliable than you think. So you don't have to be organized the way you think it is at work or in your life, and you can take changes. I started this whole course based on two things. That one was people kept coming to me and talk about starting a business, and they never did. And I don't care if they did or don't, but don't talk about it if you're not going to do it. Don't do it. And the other was they came to me with problems that seemed insoluble that I thought were easy to solve if they could just step out of their persona and look at it objectively. And I started this course based on that, and the book is based on my experience mainly in that course, but other things in my life too. And it's very successful. I cannot tell you how many emails I get from people. Hey, Bernie, thank you for this. It changed my life. And what they did is not heroic, but somehow they got permission to do it. And the story, you know, a lot of the stories are big tear jerkers. I cry a lot, I must say. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and the course you're referring to, the Designer in Society, I mean, it's kind of unique in that the deliverable,
yeah.
right, is completely up to the student. I mean, this is not. We have these experiential learning classes, right, in the business schools where company will come and say, "Hey, here's our or here's what we think our problem is," and you know, you can either solve that problem or maybe reframe it and figure out what the real problem is. But those are all kind of projects that come to the classroom from without. But in this class, every student gets to pick anything. They can pick any goal whatsoever. I mean, it's. I have a separate question about how on earth you're able to give credit for that. That's a separate question. But why do you suppose? I mean, what do you have an overarching theory as to why?
Yeah.
I mean, why do people need this? I mean, it seems is there some underlying functional logic as to why people would create so many obstacles for themselves and view the world in a way that is so counterproductive?
Yeah.
Right? Why do we need it? Why do we need a course like this? It seems like we should want to and be already figuring this stuff out in our own lives. We shouldn't need to be taught it, right?
Yeah. Well, that sort of was my question. Why are these people coming to me with these issues? Don't they have priests and rabbis and parents and psychiatry? Why are they coming to me with this stuff? So it was the same. I got there the same way. And I was not even competent to do it. So I trained myself to do it, and I feel I'm lucky that I have a natural bent for it. So it's something I didn't know about myself, and I found out I was quite good at it. And so I was glad to do it. I wasn't harming people. And I kind of found, and I did a lot of the company ones that you talk about, sponsored projects for companies, and it's a whole different cut, and it's a good thing also they learn some stuff with the company. But this is a thing, this is a human need, basically, that people don't think they should get from schools. I mean, it's ironic. You go to a place like Stanford, you can learn about everything in the world except yourself. I mean, most courses don't deal with you. They deal with some abstract Greek philosophy or some stuff like that. They don't deal with taking one step in front of the other. And so it was very popular. And you're right, like, how did I get to do it and why did they ever let me do it? It was interesting. It was during the Vietnam War. So the authorities were so busy with other things, by the time they noticed what I've done, it already had an incredible track record. So instead of saying you can't do it, they slapped me on the back and they said, "Good work, Bernie, keep it up." Except for this one guy who told me I was dealing not with things, but I should be dealing with things. But in basic, it is a thing. If I had abstractly helped, they wouldn't have said yes. And there was a time when attention was elsewhere, and by the time attention came back to it, it was already entrenched, and it was very successful. So it's hard to kill a successful thing. But yeah, it isn't something you'd normally think of doing in an engineering class.
Yeah, I mean, you use this term kind of self discovery. I mean, part of
Yeah,
what this process is all about is figuring out what your goals really are, and part of it's about figuring out, you know, how to achieve them. But isn't this kind of the traditional role of the humanities? I mean, I've talked to a lot of folks who,
well,
you know, teach in the humanities, and that sort of was the whole point of, you know,
yeah,
of reading philosophy and literature.
yeah,
Why do we need an engineer
yeah.
to teach this, right? Why aren't the philosophy teachers doing this?
Well, some of my best friends are in the humanities. Well, the philosophy is, of course, more abstract. They don't apply it to it. It's like mathematicians. They don't necessarily teach you how to do arithmetic. They teach you to do some abstract thing, which is where the field's at. And the psychology is that way too. You know, it's basically studying rats and stuff like that, and doing experiments with student classes and getting some statistic that 62% of people prefer this versus that, and they're not as applied. And you know, it's not uncommon really for the researchers to want to move the field forward and not be into day-to-day things. It's not. It's sort of, you know, somehow you don't get your brownie point, you don't get a Nobel Prize or elected to the Academy if you just helping people out. So I think the rewards are not that way, but you know, but it's amazing how popular it's become. I've been ripped off by about 10 different people at Stanford who offer similar things under different names, and I'm really glad to have them do it. But their classes are full. I mean, you know, it's really interesting how it's accepted. And most of them are not professional psychologists or psychiatrists. So it's sort of become sort of vogue.
Hmm. Well, I remember when you first came, when this book came out, and I first heard about it, and you came to Berkeley. I remember the thing that I remembered most was, you know, that reasons are bullshit, right? And I remember this was very provocative, and I got really upset because, you know, I'm somebody who, you know, believes that there should be a reason for everything, and I'm somebody who, whenever I actually like people to ask me why questions, you know, you point out that, and I kind of realized one of the problems that I had in navigating the, you know, bureaucratic organizations is because I always thought that people wanted to be asked why,
Yeah.
right? And because I always like when a student comes to me and says, you know, why are we reading this book, or, you know, why do you cold call? And I'm like, oh, thank God you asked. You're here, you know, I'm happy to talk about it and debate it. But in my life, I've realized that whenever I ask somebody why, I'm just setting myself up for a whole bunch of trouble,
Yeah.
or I'm inviting some kind of nonsensical backfill
Yeah.
that they either made up and they know it's
Yeah.
nonsense, or they don't know it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I realized, oh, wow,
Yeah.
everything I'm hearing is just a smokescreen, it helped me to really understand, particularly university administration, which I couldn't really understand before that.
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of depressing to know that's the way the world is. Yeah, but the whole idea is there are so many reasons for everything that when you pick out one reason, when you're the reason for something, it's a lie. And it's not even you may not be aware of it, but clearly there's many things. You know, my classic one is we're talking, you and I now, and I talk a lot in class. My mouth is dry. So if you ask me why is your mouth dry, the obvious reason is I'm talking a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, there is a big backstory that you don't know. And the big backstory is that I'm always dehydrated. When I go to Burning Man, I don't piss clear. I don't have, I drank a bottle of wine last night with my wife. My wife always says I don't drink enough water. And there's a million things. So I pick out of all those possible things, I pick the one that makes me best in my self-image.
Yeah.
Because I want Bernie to look good to you. And so I think I'm talking a lot, so that's why my mouth is dry. That's great. It's not the whole backstory, but everything you do, you're so complex. You have stuff in you from the Big Bang, if you believe all that stuff, and you have so much DNA and so relative. So I say, the reason for anything is some relative had sex back 16 generations.
Right.
If you wouldn't, it's the reason for it. That's absurd, right? So I'm not going to tell you that. That's like beyond the pale. But I can, within the stuff, I can tell you stuff that make me look the way I want to. I mean, it's a little tricky because I grew up with some guys in New York that were sort of nasty people. And then ended up in Hollywood and in show business and all that. But they're basically nasty people. And if you ask them for a reason, they'll give you a reason that tells you how nasty they are, because that's their self-image. They want to be nasty. I want to be a nice guy. So I give you something that's a nice guy answer. But the truth is, there's no one reason for anything. We're so complicated. When you ask me a question, it has to do with my relationship to you, what I'm willing to reveal, what you know, our history. It's so complicated. And so the point is, so what? And the big thing is reasons are often used as excuses. And that's, for me, the big so what. So reasons are bullshit in the truth that they're not the truth of anything, because there is no reason for one thing. The problem is, and who cares? So you bullshit. Bullshit is great. Bullshit is. There's a book on bullshit some guy wrote, about 50 pages. I don't know if you read it.
Harry Frankfurt, yeah.
It's a cute book. It's bullshit is a necessary part of the world. It sounds terrible, but it's. But the point simply is that if you use a reason, it's an excuse often, and it doesn't let you move forward. And it's a way of never changing. As long as you have reasons, you're never going to change. But if you realize that what the truth is, that then you can change. It changes your behavior. So it's a real big thing to avoid. And my funny story with that is I have these stickers I give out, which you put on your computer that say reasons are bullshit. And there's a little picture on it. It's from the book, actually, the chapter heading from the book. And there was a woman working in the mailroom who was from a previous century. She was like absurdly not in this century. She was sweet. So she looks at this thing which comes in and she says, "Oh, what a terrible word." And of course she means bullshit. And I say, yeah, reasons. And it was that way. I mean, it came just genuinely out of me. But it really, reasons are much more terrible word than bullshit, because bullshit doesn't do any harm. Reasons do a lot of harm in our world. So anyway, it's really interesting when people get it. It's it's a little resistance to it. People are so used to reasons, but in fact, you don't know the reasons for stuff. You just don't know it, and you make it up. And it could be socially nice, and it's a possible very harmful thing.
Well, now people don't generally like it when you point that out. So, if I have an administrator say, we can't do that because we don't have the budget, I'll say, no. What you're saying is that you've chosen to spend the budget in a different way,
yes.
Okay, which is more accurate. But it's also just makes me that just pisses people off. Right? So people don't like to hear this.
Well, I always tell, and I think I have it in the book, don't try this at home. Don't fix anybody, fix yourself. So what I do myself, if I'm forced to give a reason, I'll give it. I don't want to be a jerk about it, but then I'll say in my head what I think the true thing is. And the point is that if you do that, you'll eventually change your behavior. My epiphany came from this company. I was on the board in Berkeley, and I'd always come late to the meetings. And I'd always blame the traffic on Highway 17 in those days. And when I realized that it was not the traffic, it was Bernie Roth not leaving in time, it totally changed my life, and I became on time for everything. And it's the whole idea that as long as I believed there was the traffic, I could never change it. But as once I saw that, in fact, it was a bullshit reason, then I had to decide, do I want to be on the board or not? Do I want to waste their time waiting for me, or do I want to be responsible? And I really decided, yeah, I like this. I want to be on the board. I like this company. So I became on time all the time. And I became on time on everything. It's not that hard, you know. But it's an interesting thing to realize how just in one or two cases, if you get the idea how you're using reasons to stop you from changing your behavior, you can change your behavior. Not necessarily all at once, but slowly it'll change if you keep telling yourself that was bullshit. But don't tell anyone else. People don't like it. They get totally offended. It's a stupid thing to do. You'll lose your friends. I don't tell my wife. I've never told my wife her reasons of bullshit. I don't tell my kids. I don't tell anyone. I tell people who hire me in workshops, and I tell my classes. But otherwise, I don't say that at all. I bike with some guys every Sunday. I cannot tell you how full of shit they are. How much bullshit goes on. I never once say your reasons of. I never do. I honor them like I think they're gods. You know, they're my friends. They're not hiring me to straighten their lives out.
I think that's one of the frustrations of every professor,
Yeah.
which is that people pay us, good money to give them advice,
Yeah.
but when you offer it for free, nobody wants it.
Yeah,
Right?
true. Yeah, that's true. Well, professors are normal people. There's a lot wrong with us also, no matter. Yeah,
Right.
actually, the funny story is this woman, we were at her house for dinner, my wife and I. She says, Bernie, I hate you. I said, why do you hate me? We're good friends. She says, since you wrote your book, everyone comes on time to dinner. No hostess on time. So you don't want to apply it in your everyday life.
Right, but hey, if we get there before you, then we deprive you of your ability to beat us to the to the meeting.
Well,
Um,
the hostess is not ready for them,
right.
Yeah,
Now look, I mean, if it were just simply about impression management, right, with other people, it wouldn't be terribly harmful. But really, what you're advocating is sort of kind of a ruthless
yeah,
honesty
yeah.
about oneself, right?
To oneself, to oneself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to not. Yeah, no, yeah, it's true. I mean, it's that way. It's just, uh, it. It's funny. The students. I just got an email. I'm doing the class this quarter, and I give them a whole thing at the beginning how they got to attend, they got to attend, they got to attend, and then we do reasons of bullshit in the second week so they get it. And of course, I got an email from a guy just before this last class last week. Bernie, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be in class tomorrow. I'm not going to give any reasons. I know I give reasons, but I have a good reason for this. I thank you. And, and what it is, I don't know what it is, but he made a choice. He made a choice to do something else rather than come to the class. It's okay. And somehow they think that they would be offended if they said, I chose to do the other thing. But that's what it is. Whatever the reason is, whatever he's doing, unless someone was going to murder him if he didn't go, probably he made it. And even if it was murder, he'd made a choice not to get murdered. I could see that. I would rather not get murdered than go to Bernie Roth's class. But the point simply is to realize it's not whatever his good reason is, it's bullshit his reason. And if he realizes that, he's more powerful, and it's not. He doesn't have to feel guilty about it. He made the choice. That's it. I got no problem with that. But I hate when they give me these things, and after I brainwash them, and they still do it. It's so interesting how you can't get rid of the reason thing. It's just so ingrained in us, and they're nonsense. They really are. There's no one reason for anything. It's no matter what. Well, if you ask me why am I saying what I'm saying to you, I'll tell you. I'll make up a reason, but I don't know. As you say, I'm not even thinking about it. It's coming out of me automatically. Of course, I've talked about this before, but still, I'm not thinking. I'm just talking. And afterward, if you tell me, I'll rationalize it. Well, this means that, and I'll give you this scholarly thing. But I don't know why it's coming out. And, I don't know what. I'm on automatic. You're on automatic. That's the way we are. And thank goodness, if we had to sit and think before every word came out, we'd never get anything done.
Now, when you talk about yellow-eyed cats, I mean, I love this idea, right? That, everything that you currently believe,
Yeah,
you didn't believe at one point, and
yeah,
everything you know, like you didn't know at one
yeah,
point. And so, you're always discovering things. And, if you ask someone, like, what do you think of discovery? Everybody's like, yeah, great. And if you say, what do you think about honesty? They'll be
yeah,
like, yeah, great. What do you think about, effectiveness? It's like, yeah, great.
yeah.
And yet, right, people sabotage themselves in these ways. Is this really, does it require a certain level of, does it require a certain disposition, I guess, a type of confidence and lack of fear? I mean, because in some ways, right, if you're in a fight or flight
Yeah.
frame of mind, then, novelty is could be threatening, right? And so, I mean, is there some kind of, I don't know, precondition that you have to put in place, some level of comfort, safety, lack of fear before
Yeah.
one can kind of undertake these new ways of thinking?
Well, no, not really. I think the way I present them is a lot of it takes place in your head, and there's no risk. You're just redoing it. You're re-saying it. For example, I have this thing about and and but, like you should use ands rather than the word but. For example. Well, that's just in your head. So the point is, like I'll go in to say someone at Stanford, there's some dean that I have no good relationship with. We have a bad history, and he'll ask me something, and I'll tell him some bullshit reason. I'm not. On the other hand, when I go out, I might think about it and rethink it and fix it up in my own head. But I'm not going to bare myself, my soul, if I don't trust him. I'd say in all my history in Stanford, which is 61 years, I've had a lot of chairs. And of that whole history, there were two people I would go in and honestly talk about them and not be afraid they'd use it against me. That's two out of maybe 10 or 12. So, I'm going to protect myself like anyone else. On the other hand, I can use that experience to learn from it and see from it. But I've done this with a lot of people, a lot of workshops all over the world, and I co-teach. In the D.school now. I had to get a co-teacher for my class, and it works. I mean, everyone, all the co-teachers, only one of the co-teachers has ever taken the class. The others are just people I know, and they follow me along in the beginning, and they all end up believers, and it's because it works in their lives. It's not that they may like me and trust me, but if it didn't work in their life, they wouldn't do it. They're not stupid about it. So, and I have like students from years back, as I say, so the stuff works. It's anything human, nothing works 100%. Nothing works in every situation, all that. We're human, and it's complicated, and the people we deal with are complicated. But by and large, these things are really useful tools, and I feel good about them. And I tell everyone, probably this course is the thing I'm least competent in a formal training way to teach. And probably it's the best thing I've ever done in my life at Stanford is this class. Okay. So now how do you do that? I have 3 degrees in ME, and I have like 3 honorary PhDs on top of that stuff. None of it is for this stuff. It's for other, the equations and stuff like that. But I feel this is the better stuff in terms of as a teacher. And I have students I'm very proud of who are professors who are very in the academy. I have a lot of people who are very successful. But I think this stuff is the best thing I've done for them personally. And they're not like me, they're not clones, they are who they are. But there's a lot in it that you can find, like, there's things in the book you spoke to you, and you will use them, and other things don't speak to you, don't use it. And some people come, oh, Bernie, I did this and it turned terrible. All right, don't use it. Okay, no money back guarantee. If it doesn't work for you, don't use it. But the thing is, the main problem is people don't use it. It's not that they. I have this funny story. I have this thing in the book on reframing, on moving to get to the right problem. And I do this workshop every year in the ME design, not in the d.school, and the other professors also are part of this workshop, so they sit in the back while I'm doing this. And this one guy who I like very much, really a good professor, comes up to me every year after this thing. He says, Bernie, that procedure is wonderful. Sitting in the back of the room, I solved my problem again. And I kiss him and I thank him. And I hug. But what goes through my mind is, what do you need a bee for? It's a simple procedure. Why do you wait all year long to use it at this workshop? Why don't you use it in your life daily or whatever it is? And that's my thing is you can believe this stuff is great, but if you don't use it, so what? You can believe it's terrible if you don't use it, so what? So that's my main concern is trying to get the students to use it in their life and either make it a tool or forget about it, not just to think about it. And they're so used to not doing that. So I actually devote a considerable amount of each class to what did you do in your life outside that related to the things we talk about. And, some of them make it up so that they get by me. But basically, I think that's the thing about it, that they don't expect to necessarily practice. They're waiting till they graduate to practice being a businessman or whatever it is. And this whole idea that life is now and you can use this stuff usefully right now is my biggest fight, really. Yeah.
Well, that's what I ask you in terms of becoming effective. I mean, you use the term habit. Is there, in other words, do you get better at it as you do more of it? And is it sort of domain agnostic? So if you become better at kind of problem solving in, say, your work environment, are you then going to be more likely to be a good problem solver, say, in your in your home life? Are these domain neutral?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think that's the thing. It can be used in any way, in any way at all, and it's part of life. I mean, that was my big epiphany when I was this young assistant professor. That I mean, it depends who you believe in. You can believe in Marx and Engels or God or nature or anything. It doesn't matter. Whatever you believe in, you're in this thing and you have these problems called life. So you're given this thing and you have this thing called life. And basically you have to get from here till you die. And you have to fill it out by doing all these things, which we call problem solving, believe it or not. Yeah. And, you have to learn how to dress properly. You have to learn how to speak properly. You have to learn how to do your hygiene, all that. And that's the same. It's the same to me if I'm if I'm deciding about a piece of clothes or I'm fixing a part on a machine. I mean, it's the same idea of what's the real problem, what do I have to do, or the basic things that you're doing are similar, even though the domain is different and the specific facts are the same. But how I do it and how I approach it is a little agnostic, and that makes you a great problem solver or a crappy problem solver, whatever you do. So I think it's really important that way. And some people are better at everything, and some people are bad at everything. But I think very little things require specific information that you can't learn in doing the thing itself. And as you said, no one is born knowing any of this stuff. Everything you did, someone taught you. It's so fun. I had this thing years ago. There was a big thing about secrecy from the Russians and the Soviet Union and all that. And there was a big thing at Stanford, and some reporter came into one of my classes and he wanted to know where everyone was from. It turned out one student was from Yugoslavia, one student was from Syria, one student was from here, one was there, and he was very. But I said, but the equations we're using are Lagrange's. He was French, and and all this stuff. And I gave him like all the facts on where all this stuff had came from. It wasn't all. None of it was invented in America. And people just don't get it. That it's like we're in a community where we learn from each other, like it or not. And it's the world is bigger that way. So yeah, I don't know. We break this stuff down because it's easy to teach, and we put a border around it. And we call it this and we call it that, and it's useful in some ways, but I don't know. It's kind of in the d.school we don't have any one class where we let in only business students or only engineers. We don't let you in. We don't let it be only one discipline. And and I'll have a class literally where I'll have freshmen in there and I'll have postdocs in there, and it could be health, medicine, law, humanities, engineering, and all that. And it's because the kinds of things we're talking about are universal. And yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff that you talk about can be done through self-reflection, but a lot of it really benefits from discussions with and encounters with other people, particularly other people who may have different perspectives, right? So you're more likely to see a yellow-eyed cat if you're hanging out with people that aren't like yourself.
Yeah.
And so when you're teaching, is a big part of your teaching kind of curation of the people that you're teaching and sort of setting up these dynamic environments that so that the teaching can kind of happen laterally rather than top down?
Yeah. So a lot is giving them something to work on and then criticizing and pointing out to them things that they don't see themselves. So, and a lot of it, you team them up and you give both responsibility to be a creator and to be a coach. So they have some learning that way. Yeah, so those are the kind of techniques we use a lot. But it's so obvious. When I'm being a jerk, my wife can tell me that I'm being a jerk, and I don't realize it until she tells me. And of course, I deny it, and then I realize she's right, and I somehow crawl back and try and save some face. And it's true for all of us. We're all imperfect, and our friends see it on us, and people can help. You can help others, and sometimes you're lucky enough to help yourself. And so it's just one of these things. It's I think, as I said when I started out, there was nowhere to do any of this. Go and get a degree at a school like Stanford. And if you're studying engineering, you never once hear, maybe they have something about some professional code you shouldn't steal or something like that. But it's such an abstract thing, and it's maybe a tobacco company they're looking at. It's not something you're going to deal with in your life. So none of it seemed to relate to the person. It was all creating this autonomous professional sort of it. I don't know. It's a funny thing. So, but it's funny. The thing like now, they talk about AI. Now the big thing, used to be blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Now the thing is AI, right? And the chats and all that stuff. Well, and the big argument is these things are going to be smarter than us. Well, there's a lot of people smarter than me. I don't care if a machine is smarter than me. Questions, what do you do? What do you do? There's so many people smarter than me. I don't want to be like them at all, So, they picked the wrong thing, it seems to me. That really doesn't matter in a way. But it's I don't want to get involved in that controversy. But it's just this thing to see how what suddenly becomes life-savingly important, and every reporter writes about it. If you think about it, it's not really. When I was in robotics business, I was glad they wrote about robotics, but it was so exaggerated. It was because people make money off that kind of thing. The same thing's always true. There's always people going to profit from it, and they love this thing. But not to get caught up in that. And the same thing is true in anything. And people can help you a lot, and if it's things you talk about. And if you just talk about the ball game, it's not going to help you very much.
Now, you mentioned that while you are focused on helping people become more effective, the bulk of the design thinking discipline is really about helping organizations to be more effective at problem solving. What's the connection? I mean, if you want to be a more effective
Yeah.
problem solver as an organization, do you just make sure that you make all of your individuals, better problem solvers, or is there an extra piece there which is around
Yeah.
process?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. It's probably the answer is yes, yes, yes to all these things. You can always find examples, but basically, I mean, I would say in an ideal world, you get yourself straight, and so that you can see things for the way they are, and you're honest with yourself and all that, and you would probably do a better job working for others and helping to straighten the world out if it's not done for some bizarre reason of wanting to increase your fame or wealth or something like that. On the other hand, that might be enough thing to get the job done. I don't know. It's like, I mean, it's really interesting. It's just so interesting to look at it. You have. I just told you I'm reading a book about the Wright brothers. So they spent. They didn't take money from anyone. They spent for the whole thing 4 years till they got something flying and developed the basic science of aerodynamics. They spent $1,000 of their own money from their bicycle shop. 4 years, not counting their time, but the other way. Langley, who was the head of the Smithsonian, got $70,000 and at the same time produced nothing, absolutely nothing, total failure. Okay, so now how do you do that? Langley was a professional, one of the foremost scientists in the country, and all he knew. He was the expert on aerodynamics. And all his data was bullshit data. So how do you explain that? It's totally irrational. But you had these two guys who it just took over their lives. That's all they talked about and thought about for years. They ran a business on the side, but it was so they could do that. So how do you instill that? And here's a professional with a lot of integrity. We've named an airport after him and all that. And he did nothing on it. So it's not like it's a lot of the luck of the draw. In my life, a lot of the really great things. So I feel lucky about it. It just happened. I was in the right time in the right place, and life is that way. It's really hard. You can't make a balance. I think a lot of stuff is luck. And of course there's commitment, and all these things are useful, and they may or may not work, and nothing works all the time. So. I hate to not have, when a student comes in and asks me what they should do with the rest of their life, I always say I have no idea. It's like, it's just, how do you know? Yeah.
Well, Bernie, I would say to people, if they can't take the creativity workshop with you, they should just check out the Achievement Habit. It's a lot cheaper and more convenient, but wonderful set of lessons in there. Thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
This is Unsilo, brought to you by Alumni FM, connecting people through stories.